Hello folks, it's a pleasure to see you today. My name is Dustin Cormier. This is How to Rock Astrology. Today we're doing a continuation on my evolutionary script calendar, the astrological, age-based astrological patterns. This is an important one. Today we're going to be discussing the Naisargika or Naisargika dasha. It's the natural planetary periods of life. And just in case you can't see, I'm kind of moving this here. The Naisargika dashas flower in the same way the mahadashas do in terms of their effects coming through our planets in the chart, signs, houses, yogas, etc. Now, Ernst Wilhelm is my main dude for getting all of my information. And of course, Ernst always earmarks where exactly he gets his information in the classical Vedic jyotish literature. Today we are going to be really diving deep into these planetary periods, the age periods, kind of digging into what are their nature through the great book known as Graha Sutras, The Planets of Vedic Astrology by Ernst Wilhelm. This is a wonderful book. I highly recommend you get it because this is only just one little slice of the great depths of knowledge and wisdom that are contained in this book. Most of it is a transliteration of Parashara's Brihat Parashara Horashastra, but many things, including some of the things we're going to read here, are just coming from the Vedic corpus of literature in general on specific qualities of the Grahas, the planets. So this is what we're digging into today, and this is what we're going to be discussing. In particular, we're discussing, of course, the ages of the Grahas. So we're going to go into a little bit of detail about each Graha age as we get a bit further in this video. But first, Ernst Wilhelm makes a few declarative beginning junctures in his book about these ages. What exactly are they all about? So we read in, a lot of what we're going to read is actually going to come from Yavana Jatika of Spujid Vaja. When we get into the specifics of each planet, it'll be coming from Parashara. But for now, this comes from Yavana Jatika of Spujid Vaja. It's chapter 39. And our quote reads, "The moon's age is that of consuming milk. One should know that of Mars as the following of teeth arising." And of course, this is what we're kind of looking at here. "Mercury be the time of learning lessons up to the beginning of sexual agitation. Venus is youth, which is known as that just described, the beginning of sexual agitation. Jupiter is spoken as that of the middle. The sun runs from the half. And from the last great accomplishment is Saturn's unfortunate time." So the sun is the last great accomplishment, and then Saturn is Saturn's time. So what Ernst tells us is life has its natural periods during which specific developments occur. Each of these planetary periods is ruled by one of the Grahas. There are several different views in regards to just which age each Graha rules. Amongst Sanskrit texts, the oldest available text that actually describes the ages of the Grahas is Spujid Vaja's Yavana Jatika, the sutras of which have been given just now. Now, the descriptions given by Yavana Jatika correlate with the specific ages given in Brihat Parashara Horashastra. And this is one of the reasons why this is, Ernst is kind of showing that these two pieces of literature, Parashara being a great authority in itself, Parashara's Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra still is, laced with historical, questionable transliterations. Some people aren't sure if, someone took the words of Parashara and were a bit licentious about them in certain parts of Parashara. So it's nice when we have a text like Yavana Jataka that aligns and correlates the writings of Parashara. That's what Ernst is kind of getting at here. So before we get into these individual ages, Ernst gives us a bit of clues in terms of how to deal with this thing that we're talking about, which is the age of the ages of the Grahas. And in particular, Ernst gives us a wonderful little chapter describing ages of the planets and the dashas. Now, we all know dasha. Of course, the ages are a type of dasha, as we're going to read. The dashas is what most people know of as Vimshottari. The Vimshottari Dashas are something that happens. It has to do with the nakshatra that your moon falls into at birth is going to have the appellation of one of the 9 grahas, including Rahu and Ketu. Some say that nakshatras are ruled by these planets, by the planet that the moon's first, when in the natal birth position, the moon in its nakshatra, that nakshatra therefore instigates the first dasha period of the planet that is said to rule it, although it's debatable that the nakshatras have the quality of this ruler. I digress. But we know the Mahadasha of Vimshottari. If you're into Vedic, you'll heard that everybody has these dashas. The Mahadasha of Vimshottari is something that is specific to each individual person. For example, I'm 32 right now, which means I'm in the Jupiter period. But I am currently running my Sun Mahadasha. Somebody else, my brother, is 1 year older than me. He is also in the Jupiter period, the Jupiter age. But I believe he's still in his Venus Mahadasha. So we're on different Mahadashas, even though we're the same age, right? So it's important to discern between these two, and that's what Ernst is going to be talking about here. It kind of gets confusing, but I'm going to do my best to bring it out. Now, what we hear from Yavana Jataka is the ages in the order of the moon, then Mars, then Mercury, then the Venus period, the Jupiter period, the Sun period, and the Saturn period. Everything that we've just described here, right? These are to be understood as supporting life and share with the dashas from birth until the end of old age. So Yavana Jataka is telling us that they are kind of, you got to consider both of these. This is a supportive element to the individual Mahadasha of a person. Ernst tells us that in Vedic astrology, there are special planetary periods as well as Rashi periods even that bring about the events indicated in the horoscope. It's the Charanavamsha dasha, has to do with the signs. These periods are known as dashas. In conjunction with the various dashas of Vimshottari and the Mahadashas of each individual person, there are also these Naisargika periods, the natural periods of the ages of the Grahas that we are talking about in this episode. Now, Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra has, in fact, stated that these ages are called Naisargika. That's it, a natural dasha, the part of the evolutionary script that everybody experiences at the same age. They're technically a dasha. Now, these natural periods have a strong influence within the events indicated by the other dashas, specifically for our for most people into Vedic astrology, the main dasha overall is the Mahadasha. That's why it's called the Maha, the great dasha. So these natural planetary periods coincide with the Mahadasha period. Now, even if a Mahadasha is indicating favorable events, but the Graha's ruling period is afflicted, the Graha that rules the ruling age, if that's afflicted, then life will not be happy. Even if you're in a great dasha, you know, if you're running the sun dasha and the sun is exalted, it's got delight from its friends, it's in the 10th house, it's got all these great things, strong in Shad Bala, it's got all the things it needs for a good dasha. But if you're in the Jupiter period and Jupiter is debilitated, it's in the 7th house, it's being starved by Venus and Mercury, and it's trash in the Shad Bala, then even if you're running a good Mahadasha, the planetary age planet can ruin that Mahadasha. It shows the importance of this. Now, if the Mahadasha, if you're in the Sun Mahadasha and you're age 33, like me, if the Mahadasha, like the Sun Mahadasha for me, is indicating unfavorable events, but the Graha ruling the age is well disposed, then the individual will experience their life more positively than events would incline one to believe. Even the Mahadasha can show that there's heavy things happening. You know, you've got an unfavorable Mahadasha, the Sun Mahadasha, great shame is coming to you. But if I've got a good Jupiter at age 32, and I'm age 32, 33, I'm internally not as bad as events would incline one to believe. So these planetary periods are really a bottom layer of one's internal experience of life. Now, Ernst gives us a little clue as to the unfolding of these periods, these age periods. In the beginning of each age, noticeable changes are going to occur. You know, when you first start these periods, the beginning of the moon period, the very beginning, you're born. That's what Ernst says here as we're going to read. At the beginning of the Mars period, noticeable changes occur. At the beginning of the Mercury, the beginning of the Venus period, huge changes occur. And then in the middle of each of these ages is the high point of the age. So we're going to read about how the middle of the moon period, there's something that's specific that it peaks. The middle of the Mercury period, it peaks. The middle of the Venus period, at 22 years old, the Venus period peaks. So we're going to read a little bit about each of these right now. So for example, in the beginning of the moon's age, which we know is from 0 to 1, in the beginning of the moon's age, we're born. That's a pretty big change. In the middle of the moon's age, at 6 months, during the middle of the moon's age, the child's most rapid period of growth has occurred. From 0 to 6 months. 6 months is when this thing is just blooming like a flower. Now, for Mars's period, it goes from 1 to 3. At the beginning of Mars's age, the child begins to walk. At 1 year old, the child begins to walk and consume chewable food. And at that point, changes in the personality are also marked. Now, at 2 years old, which is the middle of Mars's age, that's the time of greatest teething pain and the highest blind willfulness of the child, the terrible twos, as we've all heard. Now, at 3 years old, at the beginning of the Mercury age, communication and curiosity increase hugely, manifold, in the child. And then at 7.5 years of age, which is the middle of the Mercury period, what we read is that the communication reaches a high level in the child. And the most commonly used intellectual skills, such as reading, writing, and basic arithmetics, should be fully usable at that age for most people. Now, at the beginning of Venus's age, which is basically at 12 years old, around there, the body rapidly changes and grows due to the onset of puberty, and the behavior and personality also change dramatically on account of increased hormone secretions. So this is a huge change in everybody by around the age 12, right? Now, halfway through the Venus period, which is going to be about 22, the middle of Venus's age, the body becomes fully grown and developed, while physical strength also becomes mature at that time. 22 is also the age where many individuals are ready to get married or to have a significant long-term relationship around 22, right? Depending on the chart and all things considered. But 22 is the peak of the Venus period. Now, at the beginning of Jupiter's age, at 32 years old, what we see is that the individual gears down to what is important in order to fully appreciate and find happiness with life. They narrow things down. They're kind of a less of the windy Venusian energy, watery passion of youth, and comes down into the sound, the narrowing of what is most important to them at the beginning of the Jupiter age. Now, at age 41, which is about halfway through the Jupiter period, the middle of Jupiter's age, the individual's understanding of their life comes into a focus. This is the midlife crisis period, as I often speak to it. It's 41 and through the 40s. Now, especially if Jupiter is afflicted, this person's life will be felt as being quite meaningless. And there will be a great effort to do something to change the meaningless face of their life. So if you've got a difficult, afflicted Jupiter, especially in Shad Bala, as we're going to read, then you will have difficulty at the age of throughout Jupiter's period, and especially at 41. Now, for the Sun, at the beginning of the Sun's age, which is about 50 going towards 60, the individual will come to realize that their life has prepared them for a greater task than they have as yet performed, or that they have squandered many of their talents and abilities, but that they now have the chance and freedom to develop the parts of themselves that they are most inspired towards. So that's the beginning of the Sun period that brings on. And of course, at about the age of 60, the middle of the Sun's age, a person often reaches the height of their inspirations. This is a crucial year during which an individual will proceed to do the greatest things yet, or, if the Sun is afflicted, begin to retreat from their activities at about 60 years old, where they begin to deteriorate and let it all go. And of course, at the beginning of Saturn's age, which is 70, the body's vigor begins to very noticeably decline, very rapidly. And having less physical energy to pursue the things of the world, the individual must naturally learn to find the happiness that is available within themselves, psychically, emotionally, etc. And the midway point of Saturn's age, which is basically about 95, the old age precedent firmly sets in at that particular time. Now, we do hear a little clue from Yavana Jataka here. And what we read is that the best dasha of a Graha, I wish my thing would stop being so blurry. The best dasha of a Graha is in its own age, right? So, I lived a good example of this. I got pretty lucky where I started my Venus dasha around the time that I was basically yeah, like 12. So, and Venus's Mahadasha lasts about 20 years. So pretty much for the most part, from 12 to 32, I was in the Venus period, which we know is 12 to 32, and I also experienced Venus Mahadasha at that time. It's a good time to be had. So, if the dasha, the Mahadasha, is indicating events that are in alignment with the natural developments of the Graha ruling the age that the native is in, then the native will be able to most enjoy the dasha and feel at ease. Now, it's not just, lining up the Venus dasha with the Venus dasha. For example, I'm in Jupiter period right now, and I'm just starting the Sun Mahadasha. The Sun Mahadasha kind of relates to Jupiter. They delight each other. So you can think of it that way. So this may happen when the planet ruling the dasha, which for me, for example, is the Sun right now, is also the ruler of the age that the person is in. So, for example, that's when I was in Venus Mahadasha and the Venus age. However, anytime the dasha is indicating events of like nature as that of the Graha ruling age, it indicates an opportune period of life. So, example again, I'm in my Sun period during the age of Jupiter. There's a correlation there that I think is positive. Not gassing myself up, I'm just trying to use them examples. I'm sure at some point I'm going to have a mix-up down the road. I think I've got Mars dasha happening in my Saturn. No, I don't know. But you guys see what I mean. Now, if the dasha indicates events that are contrary to the natural development of the age that the native is in, then the period will be particularly unhappy or stressful, and the native will feel depressed or ill at ease. So, for example, if an individual in the age of Venus, from 12 to 32, is running some kind of dasha that reflects on isolation. This could be K2 dasha. This could be the dasha of the 12th lord. Or if they're running Mars Mahadasha, or, would be a good one for Venus. Really, imagine if you had the Sun in the 12th house. The Sun is already something that's antagonistic to Venus. So if they're in the age of the Sun, no, I'm going to stick to what Ernst is saying here. We're running a dasha of Venus, and you're in the Sun period, for example. Let's say you have the Sun in the 12th house. That would be a tough one. Venus is running a dasha of isolation. I have to get this right, and you'll have to excuse me for not aligning this right. I'm going to read it first, and then we'll see if we can parcel this out. So if an individual, if an individual in the age of Venus is running a dasha of isolation, so I'm going to put this together, the person who's 12 to 32 in the age of Venus, let's say they're 18 years old and their Sun is in the 12th house and they come into their Sun Mahadasha. So the Sun in the 12th house has a 12th house energy, an isolating energy to it. Then the age of Venus, but they're running a dasha of isolation. Then many of their personal needs and desires that are supposed to come through in the Venus period will not be met. And during the time when they should be looking at their options in life, again, the Venus period, these people will likely be retreating from life, doing the Sun in the 12th house thing. Right? So we can see how that blending can happen for better or for worse. Now, evaluating grahas in their ages, and this is an important little bit, mainly leans into Shad Bala, as we're going to read here. By far the most effective tool for evaluating the grahas in their age is Shad Bala. Now, you've probably seen me talk about Shad Bala in my cold readings or just in general on my channel. I speak to it as much as I can when it's appropriate to bring it up. So if we look on Kala here, I'm just going to right click and I'm going to go to this menu. And on this menu, I'm going to click on this little window entitled Shad Bala. And so this is my Shad Bala from my chart. So if you guys have ever seen me bring this up, then you'll see that this is kind of what we're talking about here, right? Each planet has these 7 depictors of a specific type of strength and energy in the chart. It's like a sort of a report card on varying things happening in life, right? So that's Shad Bala. And each of the 6, I said 7, each of the 6 individual balas that form Shad Bala has something important to say about a Graha. If any of the Graha's individual balas is weak, then the individual will experience difficulty in respect to the weak bala. Shad Bala is a vast subject, an extensive book of which is in the works. I'm going to be getting that whenever Ernst finally has that happen. You know, so to give you an example, what the heck, we'll dig into my bones a little bit here. I'm running the Jupiter Dasha at present. Sthana Bala has to do with the capacity to speak. You know, it almost relates to Mercury. It's how you verbalize and manifest the planet in question. My Jupiter's at about 92% of what is required in Sthana Bala. It's here in the sign of Virgo, not the happiest place for Jupiter. So that shows a little bit of difficulty. 92 isn't too bad on a report card. Remember, this percentile, 100% is just basically like a 70 or an 80. It has what's required to succeed, but it's still not an outstanding score, having 100%. Now, my Jupiter is pretty close to the first cusp where Jupiter gains Digbala, so I'm at 133% strength there with Jupiter. So Digbala relates to Venus. How I experience the joy of this planet, really, is the first house. How I use the nature and intention of that planet. My Kala Bala for Jupiter is about 81% strength. My Ayana Bala is at 132% strength for Jupiter. But this Jupiter is quite close to the Sun, therefore it's going to have lower Chesta Bala. So with regard to all things related to Chesta Bala, to the confidence with which I express Jupiter in my own way, that's kind of Chesta Bala, it's only at 50% of what it truly needs to operate healthily. So I'm going to suffer in my Jupiter period from my Jupiter's weak Chesta Bala. The Drig Bala seems okay. It's getting a little bit of some positive aspect there. Now, it's worth noting for anybody who's really into Shad Bala, keep in mind that the planets are grouped into 3 groupings. There's Sun, Mercury, and Jupiter. Then there's Venus and the Moon. And then there's Mars and Saturn. And how this kind of works is that, you know, we have to read what Ernst is saying and take it for his word, that no matter what, you know, for example, I'm hurting on Sthana Bala, Kala Bala, and Chesta Bala in this Jupiter, no matter what. But Jupiter is grouped in with the Sun and Mercury. So, for example, the Sun has workable Sthana Bala here. Mercury has workable Sthana Bala. They kind of compensate for Jupiter's lacking Sthana Bala a little bit. Now, if I was when I'm running my Sun period, as we can see, I got the Sun in the 4th house. It's pretty sore on its Digbala. And Mercury being in the 5th house, Mercury likes to be closer to the 1st house. So Mercury doesn't have great Digbala either. Jupiter has good Digbala in my chart, but Jupiter, you know, if you look at all these together, it's almost like balances out kind of to about 100%, but still, Jupiter's okay for Digbala now, but in the Sun period, the Sun is going to be hurting for Digbala at that time. The Kala Bala of the Sun and Mercury and Jupiter are all quite a bit below, like all below 80% of what's needed. So yeah, in terms of Kala Bala, my Jupiter period is going to be hurting. There's no Mercury and no Sun to help compensate for it. Same thing with my Chesta Bala. My Chesta Bala is not my best report card on this matter. So the Sun is weak Mercury is weak in Shad Bala, and Jupiter is weak in Shad Bala. So none of Jupiter's friends, or not friends, but none of the other planets in Jupiter's group are going to help compensate for Jupiter's lack of Shad Bala in my Jupiter period. So that's enough scraping me to my own bones. In astrology, sometimes it's just, it's useful to do it and to show these examples. I don't really care. I don't mind sharing my chart. So again, Ernst gives us a little hope that Shad Bala is a vast subject, and he's going to, hopefully, he's mentioned here that he is working towards a extensive book on the matter. Now, the influence of other grahas will also have a say on the well-being or otherwise of a particular planetary age. Krura grahas that are in the 4th, 6th, or 8th from the graha that rules this age, or Krura grahas joining, planetary aspecting, or hemming the graha, will all make the age more difficult and unpleasant. I wonder if I have any examples of that in my chart. I don't think I do, but I'm thinking Saturn might be an example of this. Saturn's very much a Krura graha, and yes, it is in the 6th house from my Jupiter. So we have in the 6th house from Jupiter, the Krura graha Saturn. And so that is going to cause a little bit of destruction. So we see here Jupiter's in Virgo. If we have a planet in the 6th, a Krura graha, which is a malefic graha, that causes pain, right? Jupiter has a Krura graha in the 6th. If I also had a Krura graha in the 4th from Jupiter, the 6th from Jupiter, or the 8th from Jupiter, then there would be a bit of trouble on Jupiter. You could almost maybe technically call this a malefic moon that might have a bit difficulty there. I'd have to ask Ernst a little bit about the particulars on a moon becoming malefic. But I digress. We know for sure that this Krura Saturn is in the 6th from Jupiter, and it's going to cause me some hassle in my Jupiter period. Any destructive planetary aspects from malefics would also cause Jupiter difficulty. Let's see. When we look in my aspects of planets, Mars is hardly touching Jupiter. The Sun is hardly touching Jupiter. But Saturn is giving Jupiter what I would probably consider to be a 10th house aspect. So Saturn is not only in the 6th from Jupiter in my chart, but it's also giving 40 points of aspect to Jupiter. And that's a Krura graha. So that is causing even more difficulty from Saturn in my Jupiter period. Bugger. I got a great Saturn, so I can't complain where it's at. Everything happens for a reason in astrology. Now, especially if there are malefic grahas joining. For example, just like in Mahadashas, when I'm in my Sun period, I've got Mars directly conjunct the Sun, and Saturn in the 4th, and Saturn aspecting my Sun. So my Sun is going to take a real hit from these Krura grahas when I get to be 50 years old in my Sun period. All of these will make the age more difficult and unpleasant. Now, Samya grahas, which are benefic grahas, in these places will have the opposite effect. They'll make the age happy, enjoyable, easy, and pleasant. Hopefully having the moon and Mercury here could kind of be considered as benefics in this way. Mercury is just sort of generally considered benefic. The moon, depending on the text, is it's usually benefic, but the moon can be malefic, especially if it's behind the Sun, if it's waning, but also if it is past the 4th house, the moon can also be malefic as when it's dark. This is a pretty dark moon. It's still close to it's only one sign away from the Sun. So there's malefic energy there. I'd have to pull at it with a fine-tooth comb to see whether my moon would be considered a malefic in the 4th from Jupiter, or whether these two would be considered a benefic in the 4th from Jupiter, right? But I digress. Saumya grahas are, of course, that's Mercury generally, unless Mercury is really hemmed in and very close to malefic planets, then it can be considered a malefic as well. But generally Mercury, the moon, depending, and then Venus and Jupiter are especially the great benefic grahas. So if they are in the 4th, the 6th, or the 8th, if they're planetary aspecting a graha, or if they're conjunct the graha of the planetary age, then they are going to make the age happy, enjoyable, easy, and pleasant. I do have one happy example here that even though Venus is starving Jupiter, in this case, according to Ernst's rules, we have a benefic Venus that is going to be conjunct this Jupiter, which is going to bring me some pleasantries in the age of Jupiter. Even though there's a Vimshottari Dashas there, where Venus is starving Jupiter, in the planetary ages, the aspect and conjunction of a Saumya graha brings some positive potential. Now, if the lord of the age is in a dasthana, so that's the 6th, the 8th, or the 12th, then there will be difficulties towards having the best age, though the age can be enjoyable if the graha's Shad Balas are favorable, and if the graha has some strong influences from Saumya grahas. So for example, I'm in my Jupiter period. If I had Jupiter in the 6th, the 8th, or the 12th, then this would bring some difficulty. But if Jupiter was still mostly good in Shad Bala and had some positive influences from benefics, like Venus or Jupiter, etc., then it would save the difficulty of the 12th house, the 8th house, or the 6th house. If the lord of the age is in an angle or trine, then there will be consistency and a smooth start towards having a good age, as long as the graha's Shad Balas are favorable and the graha is not excessively afflicted by Krura grahas. So that's, for example, when I get to be in the age of the sun, there's going to be some smoothness because the sun is in an angle. But this is a good example. In my case, the sun here is in an angle, and that'll bring some positive benefit and consistency in what that sun is trying to do. But since, I don't have the best Shad Bala for my sun, it's at 83%. It's weak in Chesta, Iona, Kala, and Dig, and not great in Sthana. Yeah, sun's not my best fucking work, unfortunately. But so the Shad Bala is not great, and it's really getting smacked around by Mars and Saturn, which are malefics. Even though the sun is an angle, it's kind of almost canceled out by these afflictions from Krura grahas and lacking in Shad Bala. Can't wait for the age 50. I digress. I have faith in Ganesha and Vishnu that what is meant to be is meant to be. Ask me when I get there. We'll see if I have the same attitude. But that gives us a good rundown of how we can interpret these planetary age planets in relation to dashas and in relation just to themselves in general. Now, let's go through each of these individual periods and go through the nature of all of them, as it is given in Ernst's wonderful book. Again, this is Graha Sutras. Now, the guts of Ernst's interpretations are coming from Parashara, Brihat Parashara Horashastra. The times are given, the ages are given, and etc. for the Naisargika natural dasha. This is Brihat Parashara Horashastra on the chapter about longevity. It's verse 16 to 17. So let's begin at the moon's age. This is infancy. Whoop, wrong thing. Wrong slide. The moon from age 0 to 1 which peaks at about 6 months, right? So, the moon rules the period of infancy, during which the child's nourishment is dependent upon milk, and the period during which the child rapidly grows. Of course, from 0 to 1, all you can do is just be at the behest of Mother of Fate. This is the first year of life. During this period, the child is completely dependent and can do nothing by itself to resist the influence of its environment. At this time, the child is as yet unable to walk. Also, during this first year, the consciousness gets more and more anchored in the body. During this important year, the self-consciousness of the child is thus developed in accordance with its environment and in accordance with its physical well-being. Now, this is very important because from 0 to 1, there are deep reflexive, in the nature versus nurture debate, there are deep reflexive, nurtured character qualities that are bred into the person at this age that are very hard to undo. In fact, Ernst Wilhelm just has been doing recent work at this time on his early childhood planets. That's Moon, Mars, and Mercury. So far as I've seen, the work that he's done there is the most important work that I've seen in astrology, because these are the blind spots that stop a person from being able to get their needs met, because these happen at the beginning. So these are the most basic needs that we develop. 0 to 1, Moon, 1 to 3, Mars, and then 3 to 12, Mercury. So these are the early childhood planets. Ernst has got a whole chapter on his channel, but also on his website, about the incredible psychological work that can be done by working with these planets with a client. It's great, very important ways of delivering yourself from psychopathy and psychological illness. Now, if the moon is well situated in the horoscope, the first year is comfortable, the child is healthy, the body grows to proper proportions, and the environment is conducive to the child's well-being and happiness. All these things provide for a healthy self-consciousness and a good self-image that will carry the person through the many difficulties of life that lie ahead. Conversely, if the moon is poorly situated in the horoscope, again, as we know, this especially by Shad Bala, as well as by malefic aspects, etc., to the moon. If the moon is poorly situated in the horoscope, the child will either suffer physically, they'll suffer a poor environment in which its needs will not be met, and it'll almost start to believe that it doesn't deserve to have its needs met, or that it's natural for it not to have its needs met. They will not grow and develop sufficiently, or they'll suffer some other ill fate. Whichever the case may be, the self-consciousness will be developed surrounding pain and suffering, and thus the person will develop a pained self-image and an uncomfortable mindset. As a result of this, fear, worry, and anxiety will more easily invade the mind throughout the remainder of their lives. This is key, deep, key stuff. So, look to malefic aspects to the moon. If the moon's being hemmed in, which means there's malefics on either side of it, if there are malefics in the 4th, the 6th, or the 8th from the moon, or especially conjunct it, or if the moon is weak in Shad Bala, look at all these things. Or if the moon is in a dasthana, if the moon is in the 6th, the 8th, or the 12th house. Any of these things can signify, in a compounded way, some of the deepest difficulties available to astrology. which if you've ever been if you're a self-realization person, if you've ever wanted a reason to go to a therapist and to work out with a therapist or with an astrologer, what does it mean that I have these in relation to my moon as per what happened at the age 0 to 1? What might have happened there? And then you can work with a therapist to kind of get out a lot of black gunk in your psyche. It's very useful stuff. Next, we have the age of Mars, which is, whoops, I keep bringing up the wrong thing. I'm just going to get rid of Kala. Mars is age 1 to 3, which of course peaks at 2 years old. Mars is the age of teething from 1 to 3. Mars is another one of Ernst's early childhood planets, where if there are strong afflictions to Mars, if it's weak in Shad Bala, if it's got Krura Grahas in the 4th, 6th, or 8th from Mars, or planetary aspects from malefic planets, this would be basically the Sun or Saturn, namely. Or if Mars is in the 6th, 8th, or 12th house. Afflictions to Mars are going to, just like the moon, create deep impressions of difficulty that run very deep in the personality, stopping the person from advocating for themselves and doing what they need for themselves to survive and to thrive. Mars rules the period of teething from age 1 to 3, as well as the period during which the child learns to walk and run. With the gain of teeth and the ability to walk and run, the child can begin to fend for him or herself. They can at least walk or run away from danger and live from regular food that now needs to be chewed. Following the development of the child's consciousness through the moon during the previous 2 years, the child begins to assert that which is in its consciousness through Mars. This is the difficult period for most parents when the child begins to become a handful, which we call the terrible twos. This can likewise be a frustrating period for a child, during which they not only suffer the pain of teething, but during which they often feel frustrated with their inabilities. Their consciousness, having been developed by the moon, now becomes frustrated by their poor coordination, their inability to communicate, and their inability to be understood. Also, during this period, the child begins to become able and must therefore learn that which is acceptable behavior and that which is unacceptable. If Mars is well situated in the horoscope, as per the rules that we've given, the child shows patience and logically works through that which it is attempting to do. This is the first step in the child developing its abilities. Those responsible for guiding the child will likely show patience and understanding, while at the same time firmly disallowing any unacceptable behavior. This has the effect of the child learning its limits, what is fair for it to do and what is not, without it being given cause to feel as a good or bad individual. This is related to, guilt and feelings of self-sabotaging. So the child at this time is made to learn its limits and what is fair for it to do and what's not, without being assuaged by too much good or bad. I think that's what Ernst is kind of telling us here. Now, if Mars is poorly situated in the horoscope, so I should say, it's interesting that I'm really into Gabor Mate, who does the myth of normal, and it shows in that book, for an example, that when a child is angry, a lot of the times anger is actually a healthy thing for the child to express. If its body is being touched in a way that it doesn't want to happen, if it needs something and it wants to express anger, the child can ideally be allowed to express these angry needs without necessarily being guilted or felt bad or necessarily too good about overstepping their asking for what it needs and desires are. A good parent will be kind of neutral in this way and just reflect it to the child. That's what I think Ernst is referring to here. Now, if Mars is poorly situated in the horoscope, as per the rules we've given, then the child is impatient and easily frustrated. Instead of trying to work things out, the child gets angry or whines. Those responsible for guiding the child will be likely impatient. They'll be perturbed and frustrated by the child's anger and whining, and they'll get angry and they'll scold the child in an ill and frustrated tone. The child will rebel. The child will not learn its limits. It will feel bad, and it will show little desire to do what is truly acceptable. Ernst, to me, is giving some incredible wisdom for healing some of the ills of the world. I think child rearing is a very important thing. But I digress. Now the age of Mercury comes, and Ernst says a lot about the age of Mercury. This is a similar early childhood planet that is very key for assimilating how to live on planet Earth effectively without undue strife, in a way that we can playfully learn the laws, rules of the world, and as well learn playfully what works for us. You know, Mercury is buddhi, which is discernment and intellection that comes from an almost Buddha-like lack of judgment towards an object in reality and also a feeling, right? Now, Mercury, just like the other, as I've been saying, Ernst has this series on the early childhood planets. Mercury is one of them, and it's a very key aspect of understanding things that could have happened to ourselves or our loved ones as children. If Mercury is afflicted, that would cause great difficulty in communication and happiness in life and exploring who we are and what we can be. Now, since I know I'm putting chapters on these planets, I'm going to say this again for anybody watching. We talked earlier about the rules for defining whether a planet is going to do well in its planetary period. In the case of Mercury, in the case of all planets, if there are cruel planets in the 4th, 6th, or 8th from Mercury, then it's going to have difficulty from 3 to 12. Or if there's cruel planets hemming in Mercury, which means a malefic on either side, namely the malefics are Sun, Mars, and Saturn, but also sometimes the Moon, if the Moon has little light, and especially if it's waning. Or if the Mercury is conjunct Akrura, especially, or if Mercury has weak Shad Bala. These are the worst afflictions that can happen to Mercury. Now, secondarily speaking, if Mercury is in a Dastana, which is the 6th, the 8th, or 12th house, and it's got no Shad Bala, and it's aspected by Krura, malefic planets, it adds insult to injury, right? So all of these can add up to cruel afflictions to Mercury that will show affliction and difficulty at this important learning period. Mercury rules the period of learning, and that is, of course, from 3 till 12, which peaks at about 7.5. So Mercury rules the period of learning, skill development, and rapidly developing coordination, which correlates to the ages of 3 to 12. This is the period during which education should be commenced. It's not considered favorable to begin any structured or formal education before this time, not even the learning of the alphabet. Until the age of Mercury, the child should learn only what it picks up from observing its environment and that which it is able to logically understand through its own motivation. Muhurta texts, in fact, state that education should not begin until the 4th year, allowing the child 1 year to adjust to the new age. Good stuff. The age of Mercury provides for the development of the child's skills and interests. Games, athletic sports, and education are all important for the child during this period. During this period, the child also learns to communicate effectively, not only through speech, but also through reading and writing. Since Mercury is the manager, this is also the period of the child learning how to take proper care of themselves and that which they own, and to solve problems through the application of their intelligence. The words used in the sutra to describe Mercury's age mean learning rules or precepts. And so the age of Mercury, is also the age of learning to live by the rules and laws of society. Understanding them, but also understanding how they reflect on you, finding that balance. Now, if Mercury is well situated in the horoscope, and by the way, in this case, we can include there being benefic planets, conjunct Mercury, or in the 4th, 6th, or 8th from Mercury, and if it's doing well in Shad Bala. So if Mercury has any of this going on, it's well situated in the horoscope generally, especially through Shad Bala. The child pursues their interests, finds enjoyment in learning, becomes coordinated and confident in using his or her body. They develop friendships based on mutual interests, they communicate effectively, and they take care of and improve themselves. They also take good care of and improve those things that they own or are responsible for. And they learn to do this. They will show skill and intelligence, and they'll take interest in following the norms and conducts of society. So these are all things that are key aspects of the development of Mercury, and positive aspects to Mercury, as we've described, will help to support that, which will carry the person for the rest of their lives with their Mercury energy. Now, if in this very critical early childhood period, if Mercury is poorly afflicted and situated in the chart, the child will have lackluster interests. They will not participate in those things that would hone their coordination. They'll refuse to communicate in an open and proper way. They'll have no desire to do anything productive, and they will not develop healthy friendships naturally. A poorly afflicted Mercury person going through the Mercury period may not show any marked skills or intelligence, and if they do, they will not find happiness or joy in pursuing them, though they may pursue them for various ill or unhealthy reasons. There will be the tendency to break the conducts and laws of society, and problems such as petty thievery, vandalism, and various types of dishonesty may be apparent in a child going through this period at this age. The very early part of a kid going through school, it's a tricky time for this sort of thing to happen. Next up, this is going to be a long video. I had a feeling it would be. Next up, we come to the period of Venus, and that's from 12 to 32, which of course peaks at the age of 22. Now, if you guys are watching, you'll have to excuse me repeating myself, but I know I'm going to be putting these into chapters this video. We're out of the period of the early childhood planets. So you can kind of have a rough Venus, and it will bring you less fulfillment and happiness in your life, but it's not going to be as load-bearing as the Moon, Mars, and Mercury are. Believe that or not. So in the Venus period, just like the others, as we've already mentioned, affliction can happen to Venus if there are malefic planets, that's namely the Sun, Mars, and Saturn, sometimes Mercury and the Moon. If a malefic planet is in the 4th from Venus, the 6th, or the 8th, then it's going to be giving aspect to Venus, as well if any of these cruel planets are planetary aspecting Venus by their Graha aspect, or especially if they're hemming in Venus. If you got Venus at 15 degrees, you got the Sun at 1 degree, and you got Saturn at like 20 degrees, Venus is going to be hemmed in by those two, and that's going to be a malefic energy that squeezes and puts pressure on the planet. Especially, I should have said first, that Venus having weak Shad Bala in any of the various ways or in total. And a secondary one is if Venus is itself in a dastana. If it's in the 4th, not the 4th. If Venus is in the 6th, 8th, or 12th house in the chart, then the Venus period is going to bring some difficulty. Although if it's got good Shad Bala, if it's got aspects from benefics in the 4th, 6th, and 8th, then it's going to kind of make up for it. What's more important is Venus's Shad Bala and benefic or malefic planets in the 4th, 6th, and 8th from Venus. These are all going to support or deteriorate what can be expected from Venus's period, starting at age 12. Ernst calls this period passionate youth. Venus rules the passionate age of youth that begins with the onset of puberty and lasts until the following age of recognizing and coming to terms with one's purpose. During this period, the fulfillment of simple physical and emotional needs is replaced by the need for intimacy and the experience of passion. Most importantly, as Venus comes on, this is the period during which a person will begin to make decisions that will have lifelong ramifications. Decisions such as who they will be with sexually, what type of career for which they will prepare as well. Physically, upon the onset of puberty, the body begins to rapidly grow stronger until the full physical form of adulthood is reached. This is also the period during which the body is at its strongest. After the age of 32, the strength of the body begins to decline. Now, if Venus is well situated in the horoscope, the individual makes sound decisions that, and especially remember, soundly situated means good Shad Bala, and especially if it's got aspects from benefics, which in this case would be like a full moon or possibly Mercury, but especially Jupiter in the 4th, the 6th, or the 8th from Venus, and as well planetary aspecting Venus. If these are the case, then the individual makes sound decisions that provide for their betterment and a productive future. With a good Venus, a person from age 12 to 32 will make decisions to do what really is important and worthwhile for them. The body will be healthy, strong, and vital. If Venus is poorly situated in the horoscope, having malefics in those places and having weak Shad Bala, or being in the 6th, 8th, or 12th in itself, then the person may make decisions to involve themselves in ill relationships. They might get into addictive substances and other such things, which cause mental, emotional, and physical harm, and which reduce their chances of having a productive and happy future. Oftentimes, these unfortunate decisions have lifelong repercussions, such as, for example, children before one is ready. That often happens to people. Also, drug-destroyed minds and nervous systems. Weakened and malnourished bodies that aren't taking care of itself, etc. The simple weakness of Venus may cause the individual to pursue things that are not the most fulfilling, and thus they will have regrets later in life over having not pursued what they really needed in order to feel fulfilled. So the person lacks, with weak Venus situated in ill ways, it's just going to lack the things that it really needs for its ultimate ideal fulfillment and strength, depending on the nature of the Venus itself and what the person's needs are as an individual, now and in the future. If you're not going to do it in your Venus period, you're probably never going to do it, unless you go to therapy, go to an astrologer, etc. It's interesting to know that we can rehabilitate these things, but, you're essentially doing some patchwork on top of the laid ground of the first impression made in your Venus period. But I digress. That's why they should be teaching astrology in schools. Next up, we have the very important Jupiter period, lasting from 32 to 50. This is considered to be the middle of productive life. It's from 32 to 50, it peaks at the age of 41, right in the hornet's nest of the midlife crisis. So, as I've been saying, I know I'm going to earmark these chapters. So, to give it short thrift, for those who have been, I've already said this for everyone. If you're Jupiter, you might have already seen it in my introduction. If Jupiter in your horoscope, I got rid of column, if Jupiter in your horoscope, the 4th house from Jupiter, the 6th house, and the 8th house from your Jupiter have malefic planets, krura grahas. That's particularly the Sun, Mars, Saturn, and sometimes the Moon and Mercury. These malefic planets are going to cause ill to your Jupiter period. Even more so is actually if your Jupiter has weak Shad Bala. I should start saying that in the beginning. If your Jupiter has weak Shad Bala in most of its categories, and especially if it doesn't have the Sun or Mercury to compensate. Like, if you've got, Jupiter's got weak Digbala, and the Sun and Mercury, who are kind of partners with Jupiter in Shad Bala, they also have weak Digbala. They can't compensate for Jupiter's weak Digbala. If there's several of these points of Jupiter lacking in Shad Bala, then this is going to be the highest signification of damage and destruction to the person's experience of the Jupiter period. As well, the malefic planets in the 4th, 6th, and 8th, or conjuncting or hemming in Jupiter, which means, for example, you got Jupiter at 15 degrees, you got the Sun at 0 degrees or 1 degree, you got Saturn at 20 degrees, Jupiter's hemmed in by those two malefics. Also, just general planetary aspects, square, trine, whatever, coming from Mars, the Sun, or Saturn. Mars and Saturn have their own Graha aspects. Keep that in mind. But these Graha aspects to Jupiter are all going to cause the highest level of destruction to Jupiter. As well, and as a secondary insult to injury, if Jupiter is in the 6th, the 8th, or the 12th house in the horoscope, there's a bit more further significations of destruction to Jupiter there. Then these things will deteriorate the Jupiter period. Now, if you have benefic planets, which is namely Venus, since Jupiter is one of the other malefic planets. So if you have Venus and sometimes the Moon and Mercury, if you have these benefic planets in the 4th, 6th, or 8th from Jupiter, Jupiter's not in a Dastana, and it's got good Shad Bala, then this Jupiter's set up for success to get the best of Jupiter in this very important period, Jupiter being the great benefic, the great provider of great luck and joy and energy in the human experience. It's nice to know that, life doesn't really unfold with its greatest power until we're in our 30s. Those of us coming out of our Saturn return thinking that life is just stuck on this one loop come into 32 and begin to have an easier time. So this is Jupiter, the middle of productive life, from 32 to 50. Jupiter rules the period of joyfully fulfilling one's duties. It's the primary child-rearing years, the years when you would have a child and rear them and have a family. This is the age of mental maturity, during which the individual begins to more realistically see their purpose in the world. The challenges of child rearing and the mental maturity that grows during this period helps one to realize and follow one's ideals and goals, and to walk the path in which one truly believes and wants to be dedicated to. During this period, the physical vigor of the body begins to decline, and contentment is preferred over excitement, though the mind becomes more active and able. If Jupiter is well situated in the horoscope, as per what we've described, as well as just general things, then the individual will pursue their life's ambition with purpose, consistency, and contentment. While doing so, they will enjoy the fulfillment of their other responsibilities. They'll enjoy their children and find happiness in the little things in life. They'll set themselves up to experience these joys, as their life will set them up to set these things up. If Jupiter is poorly situated, the individual will feel first excited in the Jupiter period, and then afterwards depressed about their life's ambitions. Or they will have such a great need to fulfill their life's ambitions that there's discontent or frustration with not having reached their goals, and the inability to enjoy the many good things that may be in their life, due to responsibilities, to whatever they've taken on that stops them from enjoying all these little things. Children in this case might also have great stress, like it's a ball and chain, a heavy responsibility. Although if it's important and it's a part of your life, you're going to have it. Additionally, the decline of one's physical vigor and charms will leave them depressed and unhappy on account of their not finding happiness in any of their mental gifts, because now they're less charming, less physically able, less radiant in that regard. They can't enjoy the charms of Venus anymore. Now they're coming into who they truly are after the ripening period of Venus. And if you can't enjoy who you are after the honeymoon ripening of Venus, then you've got to work out what exactly is happening there. Go to an astrologer, work out what you can enjoy, understand the joys that you do have in your life, and speak to an astrologer about how you can ground those realizations, especially through meditation. Meditation is a great way for you to deal with whatever life's fruits, whatever fruit life affords you. Next, we have the sun. And the sun is considered to be, quote-unquote, middle age, which makes sense. It is at the 50 mark. You know, there's lots of life to live after 50 and even after 70 for some people. I digress. 50 is the age of the sun. And so, just like we've done for all of the dasha, for all of the planetary periods here, we have to note that the sun, if it's afflicted by having weak Shad Bala, and that's including, you know, each planet is grouped into threes. The sun is grouped with Mercury and Jupiter in Shad Bala. So if the sun has weak Sthana Bala, but Mercury and Jupiter compensate for it, it kind of helps the sun out. But even still, the sun has its own report card. Even if Mercury and Jupiter are loaded up, but just the sun is weak in everything, they help compensate for a little bit. But ultimately, the sun, weak in all aspects of Shad Bala, is going to have a hard experience during the sun period from 50 to 70. As well, if the sun has conjunctions or aspects, planetary aspects by malefics, that's namely Mars and Saturn, sometimes the moon and Mercury. If the sun is hemmed in, that's, you know, for example, if the sun's at 15 degrees, Mars is at 0 degrees, Saturn is at 20 degrees of a sign, those two are hemming that sun in, which causes great pressure on the sun and stress. Also, if the sun has malefics in the 4th, the 6th, or the 8th from the sun, these are the heaviest things that can afflict the sun for this planetary period. As well, if the sun's in a Dastana, which is the 6th, 8th, or 12th house of the chart, it's going to add insult to injury. On the other hand, if there are benefic planets that are trining the sun, or those benefic planets are in the 4th, 6th, or 8th from the sun, then they are going to give benefic, positive dimension. Or if they're conjunct the sun, they'll give some positive dimension to the sun during this period, its planetary period. The sun rules the beginning of the second half of life. The sun rules the beginning of the second half of life. And of course, the halfway point of the sun is 60 years old. So this is the middle-aged period during which a person realizes their true greatness and the success of their abilities. So this period follows the primary child-rearing years. So it's a period of greater personal freedom. You don't have to take care of the kids anymore. If the sun is well situated in the horoscope, this will be a period during which the person finds that what they have done, they've carved a path for themselves that supports who they are, and that they can do what they do with honesty and integrity. What they do is, in fact, nothing more than the duty which is born of their innate nature, of who they intrinsically deeply are, the sun, the Atma. So alternately, if their early years were very difficult or confined, this may be the period during which the individual now finally pursues their inspirations with great vigor and very rapidly finds success with them. Finally, this is your chance to be unburdened by everything and to do what you want to do with your life. In either of these cases, this can be a period of true prestige during which one's actions speak for themselves. A very important time for all of us, the cream of the human experience, the cream of your souls, what your soul has built up to. Happens between 50 and 70, peaks really at 60. That's the real cream of the crop at 60 years old. Now, if the sun is poorly situated, if it's got the malefic aspects we've talked about, it's weak in Shad Bala, what you'll find is that this will be a period during which the individual finds their life lacking. Life did not conspire to support them, or they didn't build up for themselves something great to be expected at this period. They may have the time to do great things. Though they may have the time to do great things, they have not lived a healthy life of individuality that is in alignment with their nature, that would have prepared them to do their best with those things that they have been inspired towards. Instead, they only squander their time with trivialities such as gambling is a great example of how your life force can be pissed away on this period, which a lot of people do at this time. Very important period in life. Now we have our final period here, the final aspect of this video, the old great, the wonderful caretaker of death and life, Saturn, the chink between this life and the next. Saturn is a very important period for everybody. Now, as I know I'm putting chapters on this video, so I'm going to mention this every time. Saturn can be situated either positively or negatively in the horoscope based on the rules we gave at the beginning of this. So it's especially Shad Bala. You want to have a good Saturn Shad Bala in your chart in order to enjoy the fruits of the Saturn period. As well, you don't want Saturn to have malefics in the 4th, 6th, or 8th from Saturn's position. If Saturn is hemmed in, which means if Saturn's at like 15 degrees, the sun is at 0 degrees, and Mars is at like 22 degrees, Saturn is hemmed in between those two malefics. That causes great pressure to the planet in question, Saturn. These are the most important things. And also even planetary aspects. Mars has its own aspects. If the sun is opposite Saturn or trine Saturn, these Graha aspects will also, from malefic planets, namely Mars and the sun, and also sometimes Mercury and the moon, especially if the moon is waning and if it's close to the new moon. If Mercury is close to a malefic, like for example, if Mars and Saturn, if Mars and Mercury are conjunct opposite Saturn, that would be kind of an extra malefic energy towards Saturn. I digress. So all of these things are the key afflictions that can happen to Saturn or to any planet in the planetary period. If Saturn falls, on a secondary note, if Saturn falls in a dastana, which is the 6th house, the 8th house, or the 12th house of the horoscope, it'll add insult to injury. Now, if its Shad Bala is good, and if Saturn is conjunct or aspected by benefic planets, that's namely Jupiter or Venus, and also sometimes the Moon and Mercury, as well if any of these benefic planets are in the 4th, 6th, or 8th from Saturn, then they're going to support Saturn's agenda and make life easier when you get into your Saturn period. Saturn rules the period of old age, which begins upon the completion of a person's last great accomplishment. That's the sun period, right? So this is from 70 years old onwards. This is the age of retirement and the age during which the physical body begins to rapidly decay and during which death has its approach. This is the period of retreating from the endless activities of the world to instead concentrate on spiritual affairs in preparation for death. Occasionally, however, this is also a period when true greatness can shine in the person who has lived their life in accordance with their innate nature, and who has not lived a life of continual compensation for their own inner lacks, who just feels naturally from the beginning that they are who they're supposed to be despite the pressures of society. They've maintained their integrity, and they've never felt they need to compensate for something lacking inside themselves. Now, if Saturn is well placed in the horoscope as per what we've discussed, especially Shad Bala, if Saturn's well situated in the horoscope, the person will be able to healthfully accept the fact of a decaying body and eventual death. Though they may be at death's door, they will keep on living a life of inspiration and find happiness and contentment with the good things in their life. In this case, they may well be the most productive and successful that they have been, as they take advantage of their long life of wisdom-granting experiences. There's a lot of positivity to be gained at this period, if you're lucky and if Saturn is well placed. Luck's a funny word to use there, isn't it? If you've earned it through your lifetimes of Saturnian humbleness and Saturn energy. Embodiment, I should say. Now, if Saturn is poorly situated in the horoscope, such a person will be pained by fear and distracted by their physical ailments. In desperation, the Saturn-afflicted person will hope for the happinesses that have avoided them, while ignoring the good things in their life. They'll hope for things that they never got. They'll hope that they'll think about the regrets, the lack of this certain thing that they never got to do, feeling victimized by malefics hitting them or by the lack of Shad Bala, the lack of them having the foresight. God didn't gift them with the foresight to get the happiness that they sought while they were living. They may become indifferent to life and learn nothing or do nothing and only decay away without growing personally or spiritually in this spiritually important period. You know, the life that you experience going into death often reflects, as they say in Indian spirituality, the life that you're experiencing coming into the next life. So Saturn period can be regarded as a very important period spiritually. It's a time when you can let all the other stuff go away and come into dealing with what you want to deal with psychically in the soul. Many great sadhus and sages have done with their householder duties after a certain age, and it's in the age of Saturn that they come to truly enjoy the bliss of consciousness, unfettered by material reality and the passions of youth and the passions of the ambitions of the soul. Now the only ambition they need to pursue is accepting what has come and enjoying the bliss of consciousness. And if they're lucky, they might even be on the path of meditation, self-realization, and the coming into kaivalya, moksha, samadhi. If they're lucky. But I digress. This has been our video on the Naisargika Dashas. It's a very important dimension of astrology. I'm really using it a lot in my own practice. I highly recommend you look for any of these things in yourself. Look at how your Venus is situated according to what we've talked about. See if you experienced this in your Venus period. Then look at your Jupiter period. See if any of these afflictions or lack of Shad Bala is happening in your Jupiter, or positive things happening to your Jupiter, and see if you see it in your experience of your Jupiter period. It's a very important, critical dimension of the embodiment of the divine Grahas in our human experience. Very happy for Ernst Wilhelm for his wonderful book, Graha Sutras, describing them. I recommend you get it for yourself. There's so much to learn in astrology. I was very glad to share this one with you guys today. I'm Dustin Cormier for How to Rock Astrology. This has been a part of my evolutionary script calendar series, the age-based astrological patterns. I hope that this gives you a bit more understanding when you see that evolutionary script of how these ages relate to your experience. Take care, folks. Thanks so much for watching.